What's up, guys? DJ here at Top Tech Cards and Games, and today I'm going to do a Sky Striker deck profile for the January 2020 format. Striker was the deck I played the most for the last around 2 years since the deck came out. I've had a lot of fun playing it, and I wanted to get this one out of my system once more with the new cards and give it a little bit of a try just to make sure that it's not secretly great, but it doesn't seem like we're going to get there. I do think this deck is pretty cool, and it definitely can play some games, but not what we were used to with the great Striker decks from the last several formats. We do get some new tools in the new set. Sky Striker Ace Rose, Lightning Storm, and Sky Striker Maneuver Scissors Cross in my main board, as well as a copy of Sky Striker Ace Sieg in the extra deck. So those cards are going to give us a little bit of an extra new angle to play with and some new play patterns that we can go for so we can try to win games a different way. Deck looks a lot different from some of the old Sky Striker decks, but something that kind of fell out of favor and we've brought back is the double or nothing engine. So we're going to make Utopia double, which lets us double the attack of Utopia, and we get to search our double or nothing, which lets us double the attack again, essentially. So we can come in for 10,000 with the Utopia, can't attack directly, but we can run over something, and if we can add a Hayate or whatever else into there, or any incidental damage, win the game like that. I'm not 100% sure that this is the best angle for the deck, or rather that this is the best execution. We might want to be playing, and I have one on my sideboard here, main deck copies of Mystic Mine to just stun our opponent with those, chip some damage away with the Hayate until we can establish enough ways to break through whatever they have and make sure we can run over a monster with that doubled Utopia for game. But this is where I started. I kicked around a lot of different ideas. I tried like a more stun-focused version that had like there can be only ones in the main board and solemns and things like that. But you're just playing too fair at that point. The game is just over if you lose the roll, and even if you win the roll, like you have to draw a very specific set of cards to have any chance to win the game. So let's just get into the list and talk about some things here. So we've got 3 copies of Ray. I think that's just standard. Obviously, you're going to play 3 of her. She is still the better Sky Striker Ace main deck monster, I think. Being able to get it back from the graveyard is too relevant. If games get grindy, I mean, we're not always going to kill our opponent. We're probably not even usually going to kill our opponent on our first turn, but if we do, obviously the grind effect doesn't matter as much, but I think we want to max out copies of this and copies of Sky Striker Ace Rose. I'm going to read Rose to you guys just since it's a newer card. So if a Sky Striker Ace monster other than Rose is normal or special summon, you can special summon this card from your hand. That's going to trigger on any, Hayate, Kagari, any of the extra deck monsters, as well as Ray. So if we summon Ray, we can special this from our hand. Great. Also, if it's in our graveyard, if an opponent's monster in the extra monster zone is either destroyed by battle or removed from the field by a card effect, we can special summon it from our graveyard. Then we can target one face-up monster on the field that our opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. So Rose does 2 really cool things with that. First off, if it's in our grave, we can special it back. So we can get it back without using as many resources, make sure we get it into play, and find more situations where we can put it on the board without turning off our Sky Striker spell, since we can't have monsters in play. The other thing is that it negates a monster's effect. So we can leave something sitting in play with no effect so that we can run it over with our Utopia, or just force out a negate. So both ways, that's really useful. 1 copy of Double or Nothing so that we can kill our opponent with the Utopia stuff. Foolish Burial. Like I said, Rose triggers in the graveyard, so I put Foolish in the deck to have a little more access there. I'm not 100% sure that that's the best thing that we can be doing with that slot, but I do think we want to be able to find Rose and we want to be able to make our plays. So I put the copy in. We also have some incentive to try to make sure we get to 3 spells as quickly as possible, so I think it's worth the inclusion. Some consideration is given to playing Diablos as well, since we have some spaces. We already have Foolish in our deck, and we're trying to be aggressive so we can tribute Ray, bring back Diablos, and have an extra 3k beater. I didn't think it was worth it. It's a card that doesn't do anything when you draw it still. Yes, you can summon it from your hand if you tribute Ray, but it doesn't help break the board. It strictly deals damage, and we're already playing like a Double or Nothing that strictly deals damage. So I didn't think it was worth it, but I don't know, that could be an oversight. Next, we've got 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. I mentioned already that we have some incentive to get to 3 spells as quickly as possible for some other cards that we're playing. Obviously, all the Striker cards care about that. Additionally, with 3 Kagaris in no engage, we're going to use that to search whatever card we want from our deck a little more often than you used to. I know that play happened before in the past, but Usually it was more like we're trying to get engaged with 3 spells in our graveyard, so we were like, those were the only times you really did it, unless you really, really needed a certain card. But now we can use our Kagaris kind of frivolously, and we have the full set of Foolishes so that we can do that as well. Into the Void, just another way to draw cards, try to find the important ones, and put more spells in our graveyard. 3 copies of Lightning Storm. So this is something I'm not 100% sold on. Lightning Storm is going to do a couple different things, though. Against back row heavy decks, we're going to activate it if they set a bunch of back rows, and if they don't have a Solemn, we're going to wipe their back rows and probably win the game. If they have a Solemn, they're going to pay half their life. We just burn one of their best negates. Like, everyone's happy with that trade, probably. Against more combo-focused decks, this is going to force a negate 100% of the time, which I think is fine. We have to have our plays go through. Or against certain boards, it's just going to wipe their field so that we can make our plays, or maybe even just leave a monster in play that has that was prevented from being destroyed. It's kind of awkward that if you wipe the board with it, you can't necessarily do all of your damage, but I do think that it was worth playing, worth trying at least, and pretty cool card, I think, so going to be a fun one. Metal Fist Fusion just to go with the burial goods. I love my fancy Upstart Goblin. Not much to say there. 2 Mind Control. This got semi-limited on the list. Not 100% sure I understand why that happened, but it is a really good card. I would play the 3rd copy if I could here, so it is what it is, though. We have to play with the ban list, right? It's going to help get monsters off the board. It's not as important as it used to be in going second striker lists because we don't have to get Colossus off the field, but it is going to help us clear monsters. We can take a level 4 from our opponent to XYZ with, or we can take whatever to link with to work on clearing the board. Pot of Avarice, another card we got back from the ban list, or rather, I guess that got changed on the ban list. Avarice is back at 1. Honestly, this is just an excuse to put it in my deck because it's a cool card and I wanted to try it. But when you climb through all your Skystriker Link monsters, if you need to play your Avarice, you can get 1, 2, 3, 4 different monsters in your graveyard. Unlikely that we're going to put all 4 of them in our grave, but I wanted to give it a try. If the game gets grindy at all, we can fill that up in 2 turns easily. It may be incorrect to play it, but hard to pass up getting Pot of Avarice back and not at least trying it in a deck. More pots. We've got 3 Desires. Just put spells in our graveyards, find more cards. Really exactly what the doctor ordered. Rhoda finds both strikers, so really useful card now. 3 Airspaces. I think this is important. We need to find a way to play the game. We have to be able to get our engine rolling, get our plays made, and this gets us... It just does everything we want it to. It is awkward in multiples, but I think I'm willing to make that sacrifice. One awkward thing is that we don't have any ways to blow it up other than our multi-roll, but I think that's fine. I mean, like, we could play MSTs, but I think we're better off playing Lightning Storm, so I don't think that's really an issue or a concern. I would like to have that ability, but it is what it is. Copy of Afterburner and Jamming Wave. Given that we're trying to go second and we have less striker cards, it was worth considering playing more copies of each of these. I felt that with Lightning Storm, it was unlikely we would want more Jamming Waves, especially because our opponents will probably either be... If they're not negating the Lightning Storm, we're winning the game. If they're negating the Lightning Storm, they're going to have a smaller back row and they've burned a negate, so we'll be able to we'll be good to go. Second Afterburners was an interesting possibility because I don't think Lightning Storm on monsters is going to resolve very often, and even if it does, I think it's going to leave things on the board that had some sort of protection. But targeting is always a downside there, so I decided to stick with one of each and play some copies of Vector Blast, which I'll talk about after we go through Scissor Cross. Scissor Cross is another new card. Lost it on the screen here. It's if you control no monsters in your main monster zone, target 1 level 4 Skystriker Ace in your graveyard, add it to your hand. If you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, you can special summon that monster instead. So I'm playing 1 copy of this. We can search it, we can dump it with Hayate or Burial Goods and add it back if we need to. And it just opens up some interesting possibilities just by adding another extender if we need to go off in a sort of combo-y turn. I don't expect it to be a real highlight of the deck, and it may even get cut, but it seemed worthwhile to play the 1 copy of a new card that we have some way to search. Not great ways. I mean, Shizuko obviously can search it in the end phase as well. Just to give ourselves some more capability to make plays and extend. So, interesting card. 2 copies of Skystriker Maneuver Vector Blast, and frankly I considered playing 3 for a while. Vector Blast is weird in that it's not a great card. If our opponent doesn't put a monster in their extra monster zone, it's nonsense, it's garbage. But we mill 2 cards, and then if we have 3 spells in our graveyard, Our opponent puts their monsters in the extra monster zones back into the deck. So that's interesting for a number of reasons. First off, it's a way to get rid of those monsters, but it may leave other monsters in play. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy, it mills cards. So at face value, mill 2 is not great if that's all that it does. However, if we get 3 spells in our graveyard and that turns our other cards on in a way that is relevant, that's pretty good. Not necessarily great, I would never just play mill 2 in this deck, but since the card does that as well as its other abilities, it is a decent card. Additionally, mill 2 can hit Rose, so there is some incidental value there as well. The bigger thing is that it also triggers Rose, so that we can put our opponent's extra deck monster back into the extra deck, summon Rose back from our graveyard, and go off, maybe uninhibited, or at least with something relevant off of the board. So I definitely considered playing 3 of these. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up upping that count after I test some more with some other cards. But I wanted to get all of the other stuff in here for now as well. Next up, we have a copy of Eagle Booster, just an all-around good card. I wouldn't consider playing more than one in this deck. Frankly, the first one might not be necessary, but I felt like having some way to, and maybe I'm being closed-minded actually saying that, because we can at least use that to protect our monsters from different Veilers, etc. So maybe worth considering more copies of. I'm happy with the one for right now, but definitely a card that I could see playing more or less copies of. Hornet Drone's pretty standard. 3 Shark Cannon. So I'm still playing 3 Shark because it lets us take stuff from our opponent's graveyard so that we can push for damage, get a level 4 to exceed with, whatever. Obviously we can't attack with the monster, but we can link it off, and we have some things to do with that in our extra deck. My extra deck isn't the best for taking advantage of it right now, and definitely that could use some work, but I think that it's still correct to play 3. If I needed to find a slot, I could understand cutting one, but I'm pretty sure we want all 3 copies. Widow Anchor, multi-roll, Terraforming, Upstart. We're allowed to play one of each of these, and we will be playing them. I'm going to talk about the extra deck and then touch on the sideboard after that. So I have the Utopia package. These are both necessary for doing the Utopia play. Then I put Boral Sword and then Phoenix and Unicorn in. Boral Sword is in here as an extra way to push damage, another kind of OTK engine if we start taking our opponent's monsters with Mind Control, Shark Cannon, Widow Anchor, drew a blank there, and summoning Ray and Rose, we can put a decent bit of damage on the board. Phoenix and Unicorn, same principle. If we're taking our opponent's cards, we can link these off to clear their board, and as well as use them to generate some damage, so I think that's good. And finally, just a pile of Striker links. 2 Hiates, 3 Kagaris, a Kena, 3 Shizukus, and a Sieg. Sieg's cool. It lets us banish one of our opponent's cards when we summon it, so that we can bring back Rose from our graveyard. Their monster comes back at the end of the next turn, but also we can send a card that we control to the graveyard to gain another 1,000 attack on it. That's also cool, because I guess it is another way to put Area 0 in the graveyard. I wasn't even thinking of that earlier, so that we can combo off and use that to get an extra summon into play. But it also is 2,500 attack on a Striker link, so we can use that to push as well. And it points downwards, so that we can summon stuff down there. All around pretty relevant. Sideboard, just kind of other cards that we considered. I've got 3 Drools. This is sort of just representing hand traps. The biggest issue with this deck is going to be beating Spiral going second, S-words, right? Because their boards are just hard to beat. There's not a lot that we can do to interact super favorably with a board of like Trigate, Sleeper with a Last Resort on it. Drill's pretty good at stopping them from setting up, though, so it's worth considering. And I also have Impermanence over here for the same reason, just as an additional hand trap. 3 evenly matched. If the first set of Lightning Storms is pretty good, I could argue that up to 6 could be pretty good. We do lose our battle phase with evenly, though, so we don't get to push for any damage and set up if we needed to use a Hayate to set our plays up or anything. So I don't love it as much, but it could be the case that we just need cards like that to force negates through, and maybe the way the deck is built needs changed a little bit. I have 3 copies of There Can Only Be One in here if there's games where we might get forced to go first. It's just the best floodgate for the deck still, and really can hamper a lot of decks. I mentioned the Mystic Mine earlier as a way that we can just stun our opponent's monsters in place so that we can eventually, poke them out with Hayate a couple times and then run over with Utopia for lethal. So I have that in here as well as a copy of Set Rotation and Metaverse. Both are limited, so we couldn't play more than that. But these are both nice cards. Metaverse, when we go first to get the mine, is also a play that can be pretty strong, just as using it like a trap card. And Set Rotation can find Area 0 as well to help us set up. These are all cards, these 3 that I consider putting in the main deck, as well as maybe even more copies of Mystic Mine, and same with everything in here except for There Can Only Be One. I think that is correctly a sideboard card in the deck if you're going to play it this way with like Lightning Storms and stuff. Like I said earlier, you could build it differently to go first and try to set cards like that, but I just don't think that's a winning strategy right now for the deck. So I don't know. I think that... Oh, I already took the lid off. I think that this is a cool list. I think it's a deck that I'm going to have a lot of fun messing with. It's always going to be a pet deck of mine, but it's not perfect. It's got its issues, and like I said, I wanted to get this one out of the system so that I could get it done and over with while I start working on decks that I think have a lot more promise in the format. But it does have a lot of tools and can fight against a lot of things, so I'll play some games with it just to see, but it is probably time to start looking more at decks like Spiral, and well, that's really the deck that I see as having the most promise right now. So there's a spoiler for the deck that I think is the deck to beat for the upcoming format. I think this is pretty good against most other things, and we would need to work on how the deck is built in order to beat Spiral. So start packing Drolls, Kaijus, etc. in your deck so you can beat those last resort sleeper builds. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I'll have more content coming soon.